All right. So tonight, I'm going to ask everybody to hit mute. And at the end, we can do question and answers. And tonight, I am very excited to introduce photographer and friend William Wayland. And several years ago, I started seeing tons of William's work all over Facebook. And honestly, I was slightly intimidated by him. But once I met William, I knew that was a crazy thought because he is so down to earth. And like me, he loves talking about photography. William is the perfect person to share with us tonight, not only because his work is stellar, but because he exemplifies something in photography that I think is lost today. It is not about having the latest or most expensive camera or being able to manipulate images in Photoshop. William uses a very simple approach, and I think hearing his presentation will be helpful to both advanced photographers and newbies. So I'm going to hand the floor over to William. And I'm going to do a little speaker mode. There we go.
Wow. I mean, thanks for that introduction. And before I get started, I just want to thank you and everyone in the Fairfax Photo Club. Just for me personally, going through this exercise, I think has been just really enlightening. Going back and having a chance to look at my photos and put them in context and think about them in terms of, how to present them. So that's been a great exercise for me. And let me go ahead and share my screen. You. Okay, here we go. Beyond the Butcher Shop, Lessons Learned from Over a Decade in Photography. So that's the title of my presentation. This is a photo of my dad. And when I was 12 or 13 years old, he brought home one day a camera. He brought home a Nikon EM camera. And he also brought home a Time Life book. And the book had all kinds of images. I don't even remember which Time Life book it was. It might have been Greatest Photographs of the 20th Century. And it had this photo in it. And this photo, it's the only photo in the deck that is not mine. And it has stayed with me throughout my life since I've seen it. And because I'm afraid I'm going to forget what I wrote about it, I'm actually going to read a little bit of something about this photograph, if that's all right. The title of this photo is Aid from the Padre. In 1962, photographer Hector Randon Lavera was photographing the Venezuelan Civil War for the newspaper La República. In a battle between government and rebel forces, he watched as Father Luis Adia walked through gunfire to give last rites to a soldier wounded by a sniper. Rondon, the photographer, later said that he had to lie flat to avoid getting shot, and that he was unsure how he even managed to take the picture. Quote, "I found myself in solid lead for 45 minutes. I was flattened against the wall while bullets were flying when the priest appeared. The truth is, I don't know how I took those pictures lying on the ground." This photo won a Pulitzer Prize for photography in 1963. And for me, I think the reason why it stuck with me is because this photograph, just one image, I think, tells a story. And whether I had read that piece about this photograph or not, I think anyone can tell that this is a photograph of a priest comforting a soldier. I think you don't necessarily need to know the facts to sort of understand the beginning, middle, and end. So to me, this is the middle of a story. I'm not sure how it ends. And the other interesting thing about this photograph, I think if you look harder at it, and you spend as much time with it as I have, you know, in the background, and I don't think any of this was well, I know it wasn't intentional, is a butcher shop. So in Spanish, this is carniceria, which also means carnage in Spanish. And in the foreground, you can see there are all kinds of bullet shells. And for me, this is just an image that I think about at least weekly. So it's just not that I ever imagined becoming a war photographer, but for me, this has always been sort of an ideal image. I photographed a lot as a teenager. And then for a decade, 2 decades, I don't know how long, I didn't photograph very much at all. I didn't take it, it was a hobby. I still photographed, but it was the kind of, photograph your friends. And it just wasn't something that I took seriously. But then 10 years ago, I took a gig that put me in Royal Oak, Michigan for 2 weeks out of every month. I brought a camera and a tripod with me, and I photographed every night after work. Each photo in the Royal Oak series is taken within walking distance of my apartment. So I imagined, as soon as I took this gig, I thought, gosh, this could be something where I go home, or rather I go back to the apartment in Detroit. I make dinner, I watch TV, I go to bed, and I do it all over again. And I thought, what a great opportunity to go out and photograph and use this as an opportunity to hone my photography skills. So I call this the Royal Oak series, and I'll just do it in 5 photographs. So when my gig ended in Michigan, I was looking around for the same lighting conditions in the Bay Area, but I couldn't find them anywhere. Then I realized that the light inside of nightclubs and concert halls was very similar to the light that I was experiencing in Michigan. And I could get it by reversing all of my camera settings. So instead of a long shutter speed of a minute, I would cut it down to a hundredth of a second. And so I started shooting music, and soon I was recruited to photograph for a Bay Area music site called the Bay Bridge. And after that shut down, I co-founded another music site called Static and Blur. And so this is my music photography in 10 photographs. Before that, though, I'm going to see if this works. And last year, a photography storage, they also do websites. They asked if I would be in one of their videos. This is just a minute long, but hopefully this talks a little bit about my music photography as well.
A lot of people get into concert photography because they want to go shoot the Rolling Stones. For me, I love shooting the light in these venues, and it almost didn't even matter what the band was. Photography for me is just a full contact sport. I might be on the floor, be upside down. What's the angle that no one is falling over themselves to get? I'm capturing an event that's never going to happen again. When I download those photos off of my camera, I want to make sure those are always going to be safe. When I look at my photographs, I'm still feeling what I felt at that particular moment. what the crowd was feeling. There is something about the energy that a camera can capture. This lens sees notes.
So sorry for that little plug for Smug Mug. But in the course of sort of talking about photography with them, some of the things that I believe in with music photography sort of came out. One of them is about photographing famous musicians, at which to me I'm not particularly interested in. Sometimes I have to do it, but I'm much more interested in shooting local musicians, and so here are a few of those. And I think before I get to the next section, I think what I'll say about this is, um, for me, shooting music photography, if I were to just sort of stand there in front of the band and kind of shoot at eye level, to me, I'm trying to present something that's very different from what the audience is seeing. So, for example, this is just one example, but I sort of figured out a way to get on top of the drummer and shoot down on the drummer. In a couple of the other photographs, you might have seen that, I figured out a way to shoot between someone's legs by getting on the floor. So I just think it's a much more interesting approach to music photography than I think just kind of shooting straight on, which to me is kind of boring. So one of the places that I photographed was the Paper Mill Creek Saloon. The bartender seemed to get a kick out of me crawling around on the floor, photographing bands, and soon I was given permission to basically go anywhere. I mean, I could stand on top of the piano, I could stand on top of the bar. They really didn't care. So I found that shooting from behind the bar gave me a new perspective and a new subject that I hadn't really planned on shooting. So these are the Paper Mill Creek Saloon portraits in 10 photographs. And I think that's the last one. So I think, right, I'll stop and say, these are a mix of candid shots, shots where, I've discovered that no one expects a photographer behind the bar. So I've found that I'm able to, I can almost be upon someone and photographing them and they don't notice. But then the other thing I noticed from being behind the bar is that when you are standing where the bartender usually stands, people seem to be very comfortable with you. Sure, there are a couple of people who don't want to be photographed, and I don't photograph them. But for the most part, people think it's what a great thing. Here's this guy behind the bar, and he wants to photograph me. And there's obviously a lot of interesting characters at the paper mill. So I have no end of subjects. I never leave there, I feel, without without a great photo, or at least a photo that I'm happy with. I'll say it that way. Oh, there is another one. So the next series is a natural evolution of my music and Paper Mill Creek Saloon portraits. It's intended to be a counterpoint to traditional landscape photography, where others see expansive, colorful, serene, and spiritual landscapes. I wanted to reveal another perspective, which is sometimes dark, hidden, and potentially even menacing. So maybe I'll just explain that a little bit. You know, I think I started sort of seriously photographing in Royal Oak, Michigan, and those were at night, and photographing buildings. And the journey took me through music photography and portrait photography. And to me, I think I need to explain that to me, this feels like a natural evolution, even though it may not look like it when you see the photographs. And I call this Nothing Against Pretty Flowers. A few of these I've posted. I think that's the last one of this series. Okay, so I think for this presentation, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I think I've learned, or at least rules that work for me. I found myself very early on, even in the Royal Oak series, and you know, maybe because I was a philosophy major in school, and I would always be kind of thinking about what I'm doing, my approach, what's working for me, what's not working for me, why is it working for me. And so I thought one of the great things about putting together this presentation, at least for me, and I hope for you, is I put together some of the rules. Well, again, some of the rules that work for me, and I guess I want to say it that way because this may not be for everybody. So I find limitations are very liberating. And you can see that I like the idea of constricting all of my photographs to a bar room and just working in that environment, or a stage and just working in that environment. I mentioned this at the beginning of the Royal Oak series. Every photograph was within walking distance of my house, and just kind of focusing on what I have at hand. And in that spirit, to me, I've just always found that personally, equipment doesn't matter to me. I don't worry about getting the latest camera. In fact, usually when I'm out shooting, especially if I'm in a photo pit at a concert, I look around and I usually think I've got the worst camera. For me, and I think this comes out in the work that I showed, perspective is actually more important than equipment. And getting the right angle, or getting an interesting angle. I'd rather see a photograph from a more interesting angle than one that's maybe tack sharp and technically perfect. I try to be invisible when I'm shooting. And if I can't be invisible, I try to at least be non-threatening, which is another lesson that goes all the way back to photographing in Royal Oak. And I say that because a guy walking around at night carrying something under his arm, which might actually look like a gun, it occurred to me many times. Um, uh, I used to wear kind of a silly hat to deliberately make myself look like someone who is not trying to cause anyone harm. Um, Another lesson that for me, I've often, when I go out to photograph, I have in my mind what I want to get. But then if I see something, um, I know I'm going to stop and take that shot and forget about what I was intending to shoot. Um, because I've found that sometimes if I pass up the shot and I try to go for that other shot that I had in my mind, well, that was in my mind and it wasn't really there. But on the other hand, another thing that I learned is that when I'm photographing, I I frequently look around because I'll often find that, oh gosh, I'm photographing this, but the real shot is actually behind me, and I find that in all kinds of things. Um, Maybe not for everyone, but I will sacrifice my body and my equipment for photography. I shot a show maybe a couple of weeks ago, and the singer remarked to me. He said, "Gosh, you know, I was on stage, I'm performing, and then I see this camera sliding across the floor." And that was because I needed to move from one side of the stage to the other. And I thought the best way to get there was just throw my camera from one side of the room to the other. Um, Shoot what you know and shoot it over and over again. There was a person who commented to me one time that I really, she said to me, "Gosh, you really love your subjects," and that is true. I believe in shooting uh, what I know, what I'm comfortable with, and I will shoot that over and over again. Um, I, I I personally don't need to go out and discover. I feel like I could shoot in the room that I'm standing in for a full year and never get tired of that. But and I think I commented on this earlier in the presentation. For me, it's really about light. Um, I I really feel like I'm anything that I shoot it's about the light. And I have a thing. Maybe I should have put it in the presentation. That I have a bit of a mantra, and that is not to shoot nouns. And if I find myself shooting people, places, or things, and not thinking about the light, I feel like I'm making a mistake, and I have to sort of stop what I'm doing and remember that it's not necessarily the person that I'm shooting, but the way the light is hitting that person, if that makes sense. Um, and then lastly, and this goes back to the photograph that I shared at the beginning, whenever possible, and I'm not always successful at this, but whenever possible, when I'm taking a photograph, I'm thinking about the story and the beginning, middle, and end. And I usually feel that I'm shooting the middle of a story, and that the viewer will be filling in the rest. And that's why I usually, for me, I don't put descriptions on my photographs, because I really like it if someone will bring their own interpretation to that photograph. And it may not be surprising, but I'll have people look at a photograph and tell me, "Oh, I think this is happening," and that was not what was happening. But I enjoy that they're interpreting something or seeing something that maybe I didn't see. Um, so now I'm going to completely switch gears, and I'm going to talk a little bit about process, and hopefully this works. Um, so my process is pretty simple. It's sort, select, and edit. But I think maybe what's different about it, if it's different, I don't know, is it's pretty lo-fi. So I'm gonna share some screen captures for you guys. Actually, I realize this is blurry. It sharpens after I hit the play button. During the Fairfax Festival a couple of weeks ago, I saw this house that was being renovated, and it had a chimney there, and it had a wall, and I was like, oh, I have to shoot here. I called up several people, musicians, and I said, I found a location. I have to shoot here, and I was and people were like, oh no, it's too last minute. I can't make it. I can't do it. And I finally got another friend of mine with about an hour's notice. She was actually finishing up a gig in Sausalito, and she said, "Okay, I'll come and we'll make this happen." So we did this photo shoot in this house, or partial house. We probably shot there for a grand total of 15 minutes. And I'm going to take you through a little bit of my editing process from that. And what you're going to see, I should probably tell you in advance. So what you're going to see is it's going to be a little bit jaggedy because this is my screen as I'm going through photos and making that sorting process. And I don't know if that went too fast, but this is I haven't taken the photos onto my computer yet. What you're seeing is this is all in the hard drive, and I'm just looking through the files in the hard drive, and I have a color-coded system that has developed over the years. And yellow is so a couple of these photos I was labeling yellow, and that's maybe this might be one. And then I go to, after I've selected a bunch of photos, and usually I have way more than I would ever want to actually edit, I go through a selection process. And this is still, I haven't imported anything. This is still on the hard drive. All I've done is offloaded them from the camera onto my hard drive. So green is another sort of, that's a sort of the second round of maybes. Like, oh, I've looked through the yellows, and this one might work. This is sort of my next round as I'm going through it. Maybe this one, okay. It's a little bit more refined. Then I go through my greens, and then I'll pick the one that I'm actually want to edit. And so I mark that as red, so I'll remember, oh, okay, this is the one that I downloaded to my computer. And then the edit process, which, so this is now, I download to the Apple Photos program on my computer. And by the way, I don't always shoot black and white, but for this example, we're doing black and white. And this is how I would edit this photograph. It's probably about the extent to what I do when I edit. And maybe I go back up and tweak something that sort of feels like it changed. But for the most part, I'm just sort of adjusting brightness, contrast. Maybe maybe I'll crop a little bit. I just crop this to an 8x10. And that's it. That's my process. Thank you. That's it. That's the show.
So if you all want to take your mute off, feel free to throw some questions out, or you can, hit the little reaction button and raise your hand, and I can call you out.
So I just want to say I thought it was great. I loved it. And I'm inspired to hear that you don't have to have the fanciest camera and the fanciest editing software. You get tremendous results from your methods, and I find that very impressive. So
I think one of the things, maybe this is obvious, and I don't know if I should have called it out, but I think it's important for any photographer to know their way around the camera. I said at the beginning of the presentation that the camera that I got as a child, as a teenager, was a Nikon, and I still shoot with Nikons. And part of the reason for that, I think, is because I know my way around Nikons. I remember I was on a shoot one time. Someone had a Canon, and I had to shoot with it because they had a lens on it that I needed to use for that particular shoot, and I could not find my way around that camera. Now, I'm sure if I tried harder, if I maybe spent a little bit more time, but in the moment, I know my way around my camera without without having to look at it, without having to look at the buttons.
right. Yeah.
Which Nikon do you use?
I've had 2 years. I'm still learning my way around.
Which Nikon do you use, William?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
So I have a Nikon D7200, pretty middle of the road camera. I mean, it's still about $1,000 or something like that, but it's not a full frame camera. And then I do have a full frame camera, a Nikon D750. And usually when people see me out, I usually have both of them with me. And I have different lenses on each. I use the D7200, sort of a general purpose. I have a stock lens on it. And then I usually have a 50 prime on the D750. So with that one, it's just a sharper camera, and even with or I should say sharper lens. And when I'm shooting bands, even maybe because of the way I shoot bands, I think a lot of music photographers probably wouldn't use a portrait lens because you're either too far away or but I like to shoot with a portrait lens.
50 millimeter, a really fast one? Is it like
this particular one is a fast lens. I guess in theory it wouldn't necessarily need to be, but the prime lens, and forgive me, I hope no one thinks I'm over explaining, but so if you've got a 50 lens or just a prime lens, you can't zoom in or zoom out. And the great thing about that for portraits is you've got less glass in the way. So it tends to give just a sharper image, however you're using it. So, photographers, will joke that, what is it that, the way of adjusting the focal length is with your feet. So you've either got to be, so you've got to be, if you want a close up of someone, well, you've got to walk and be closer to them. And if you want, further away, you've got to stand further away. I don't know if
There's a term for that. We call that the sneaker zoom.
Yes, that's what I was looking for. Yes.
So, William, can I ask what keeps you inspired shooting day after day after day?
Thank you. Boy, you're teeing up a great question. Um, I think for me, it's probably a few things. And again, it goes all the way back to, I think, just being a kid and, seeing the magic of an image come to life. And, especially just being able to just, I think for me, capture a moment. I was telling Stephanie in kind of our warm-up presentation that what I love about photography is that and I compare it to video because people will ask me, oh, do you shoot video? Or especially around bands and musicians, I get that question a lot. Oh, hey, we're going to play here. Do you think you could shoot some video? And I don't always get into this long explanation, but in this context, I will. For me, photography is like poetry, again, because I think the viewer needs to bring so much to it. And I think what a good photographer is able to do is create an image that a person wants to linger on, and spend time with that image. And I only because I used it in the presentation, I'll go back to that, the priest and the soldier image, and I think about that image, every week. And not to say that there are not great films. Obviously, there are great films. But what I don't like about films or video, maybe I'll say, is you're essentially being told how to react to it. You're being told the beginning, middle, and end. This is the story that we want to tell you. And for me, that just makes it a little bit less of, I don't know, less interesting for me. And again, I would hate for someone to walk away from this presentation and think, oh, we heard William talk and he tells us he doesn't like video. It's just very different mediums to me. I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you.
I know you're a project guy. Tell us what's next.
Okay, project. Well, I should say that after initially the Paper Mill Creek Saloon was intended, or maybe I'll say it this way. It was a project, but I didn't necessarily feel like it was going to go anywhere. And people would always say, oh, this could be a book. You should turn this into a book. And for the longest time, I said, no, I don't think so. I don't think I want to make a book. But then I finally sort of said, I think I have to do it. It's one of those sort of projects that feels like, if I don't do it, I'll regret it. So one plan is to turn the Paper Mill Creek Saloon series into a book, which I'm going to try to do. I might fail hopelessly. But the other project that I'm starting was inspired by last month's water challenge, which even when we get this challenge going, I'm going to be working on. So when we got the water challenge from the last presentation, I had this idea that I would shoot headshots in the bay. And so what I'm hoping I can get is people who are interested in dressing as they would for work, or as they would for, for any headshot, for their website. Except we're going to go into the bay, and unfortunately I'll be in the bay with them, and photograph them, hopefully from the waist up, in the bay. And I've told people, and I'm working with the Southeast Rowing Club on this, so they've told me they're going to help me recruit people, and I'm hoping for proof of concept that I can get at least 10 people interested in this, and I've told them that I suppose I shouldn't describe every detail of the project, except to say that I really hope that we can play it straight. And by that, I mean, I'd like it that that it's not, oh, hey, look at me, I'm in the bay, isn't this funny? But it's, I want people to look as serious as they would look for a headshot, except we'll be in the bay. That's the next project. Hopefully that's going to happen this coming month.
Should we do the challenge, and I'll let you read it?
Sure.
Hang on, I'm gonna open it up here on my computer. Saw it earlier. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen and I'll let you explain our challenge here.
So this might have been predictable, but the July photo challenge is to give the viewer a story, a beginning, middle, and end. This photo wasn't in the presentation, but it's a photo of mine, and I'd like to think that that a viewer sees this photo and imagines sort of where it came from and where it's going. And so I thought that might be a nice photo challenge for July.
I love that photo. Did she ever turn around for the shot?
No, I don't think she did. No.
Was he pissed off in that photo?
Well, if I tell you, then you're, I mean, what do you think?
I think he's pissed or irritated. He's trying to score and you're in his way.
I don't think I'm going to give it away. Because that's what I like about photography. I like that people are bringing their own ideas to it.
Erica's raised her hand and has a question. Don't forget to unmute.
Hi there. Can you hear me now?
Hey, Erica. Yeah.
Hi, William. Thank you so much. That was awesome. I was going to ask a question, but I think that story is he's getting ready to toast somebody. Because I've watched him before, and he's such a friendly guy. And I can't ever imagine him being upset. So I gave that one away. But then I wanted to ask, I can't help but notice that you do everything in black and white, or most that I get to see posted online on Facebook and stuff, and with music and the paper mill and all that. And I just wondered if that's like what you've kind of settled on, or you've always done that, or and I totally vote the paper mill book awesome because they're changing hands.
Thank you.
It's closing up a whole 100 years of something, right?
I'm going to send you an invoice for a copy of the book to get this thing going. I will tell you that I'm sort of fighting I realize that I'm known for black and white, and I can see why, because I do a lot of black and white photographs. Most of the presentation was black and white. I think for me, there's a couple of reasons why I've landed on black and white. And part of it, I admit, is aesthetic. And, when I was a kid, I used to shoot on, 400 tri-X, I think. That was my film of choice back in the day when I used to use a darkroom. And then now in that Royal Oak series, those were actually all color, and part of the reason for that is the light. So I think I think my answer is going to be to you. I think in the conditions that I shoot in, that I typically shoot in, color is really hard. And so a lot of clubs where I shoot or venues that I shoot, the light can be really uneven. A lot of times the light can be very red. And photographers know, or maybe I'll just say, that music photographers, if you ever talk to music photographers and you ask them what their main complaints is about shooting music photography, probably the first one will be red lights, because it just makes everything super buzzy and glary. And so some music photographers will try to sort of figure out a solve for that. I always think the reds look really weird when someone has gone into Photoshop and sort of tried to manipulate the red to make it look less red. So my solve for that, especially because, oh gosh, I don't use Photoshop or Lightroom and I'm just sort of doing these lo-fi edits. I figured out, well, I can do black and white, and then that works. Also, the paper mill is another example, and the paper mill is just also, it's probably a lot darker than it looks from the photos. I have to brighten up those photos. Also, the light behind the bars, so the light behind me when I'm shooting, that's the light that I have to use, that's red. So it's another, this red light. And then I guess, I don't know if I'm answering your question or just rambling, but the nothing against pretty flowers. That was sort of a conscious decision too. I don't know. I think I'm finding out your answer as I'm explaining it. Because I thought, oh gosh, I kind of want to, for this series, I kind of want to do the opposite of like these sort of really, we've all seen these beautiful landscape. We live in a place that's really beautiful and picturesque, and we see these like, amazing hills and stuff. And I was deliberately trying to do everything that I could to be exactly the opposite of that. And I guess, so black and white, I think, was sort of a conscious decision. That said, all of that said, I think you're going to see more color photographs from me, because I'm actually, maybe this is a William Wayland personal challenge, shoot less black and white. I'm trying to shoot more color, just because I don't want to just be, oh, that black and white guy. Oh, I know William, he's that black and white guy. And so I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's my 10-minute long answer.
Bo Schuer has a question.
I have a question too.
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, a little bit muffled, but go ahead.
Very muffled.
I've been reading myself. Is this okay?
It's a little muffled. If you want to write the question in the chat, we can read it.
I'm not sure about how to do that.
I might be able to hear you. And if I can hear it, I'll just repeat the question.
You mentioned about being invisible or non-threatening.
So the question is
Invisible.
about being invisible or non-threatening.
And you gave the example of wearing a silly hat to be sort of blend in or non-threatening. How are you invisible? How do you make yourself invisible, especially the portrait you put behind the bar?
So I think my way of, so the question is, how do I make myself invisible, especially when I'm shooting behind the bar and I'm really close to people. Did I capture the question correctly?
Yes.
Okay. So how do I make myself invisible? I think for me, it's there again. I have kind of a multi-part answer, unfortunately. So I think it's partly now when I go shooting, I think for the purposes of this presentation, I felt like, oh, I have to dress like I'm going out to shoot. So I, well, not unlike other photographers, I dress in all black because I in my mind that sort of makes me invisible. Um, and also when I'm shooting, say, music, I'd like to think now when I say I make myself invisible, I don't know if I literally mean that, but I do try to I try to make myself just very small and just very unnoticeable when I'm shooting. And even when I'm behind the bar, maybe part of it's psychological or maybe it's a mind game. But I find that I can I can almost be on top of someone and photograph them, and I'm kind of amazed that they don't notice me sometimes. If I'm honest, that's how close I'm getting to people. And so I don't know if I've answered your question because I know I'm not literally making myself invisible, but I think through a process of just trying to wear black / unobtrusive clothes, trying to make myself very small. In an earlier version of this presentation, I elected to kind of take all these photographs out because I don't know, I just didn't feel the need to. But after I shoot, because I'm often shooting on the ground or I don't know, up on a scaffolding somewhere or even on the stage somewhere. Maybe so there's a photo that I almost included in this presentation that shows me sort of wedged between an amplifier and the drum kit somehow. And I'm literally sort of in the corner of the stage. My legs or my knees are up near my face, and I'm just kind of there with my camera. Um, but and so I don't know whether the audience sees me there, but I got a great shot, sort of looking through the performers at the audience.
Mallory has a question.
Yeah, I do not understand at all the next thing we're supposed to do. The
Oh.
beginning.
Well, the way I think about it is, I think the challenge is, and I'm not always successful at this, is to think about a photograph where the result of the photograph is it gives the viewer a story and they might bring something to it. In the photograph, in the poster example that Stephanie asked me for a photograph as an example of this, and I was kind of on the spot. because I was like, oh gosh, I didn't know I'm going to have to come up with a challenge now. And so I quickly went looking on my hard drive, and I was like, oh, this is one. And so the example photograph is I took a photo of a person, of a guy, and and I'm sort of shooting through this sort of wire blind, so I'm kind of on the other side of it. And I don't know if we should put it up on the screen, but he's sort of looking at me, but he has here, we'll put it up on the screen rather than having me just describe it. So I gave this as an example, and the priest and the soldier is another example where, at least for me, I look at photographs like these and I go, huh, I wonder what's going on here. And maybe the challenge, the implied challenge is the viewer has to sort of figure out what's going on, or interpret what's going on, bring their own sort of thought to this. So not to over explain this one, but since we're using it for the challenge, I'll do what I never like to do, and I'll explain it a little better. I hope a viewer of this photo goes, "Huh, this is interesting." The perspective is actually on the other side of what looks like to be like a gate, or some sort of screen, shooting through that at this person, guy. So this guy in a suit, who's got a drink. It looks like he might be in a bar, but I can't tell. And he's looking at the photographer, or he's looking at the viewer. I can't tell. Is he just saying hi? Is he angry that he's being photographed? You can also see there's this woman there. You just kind of you really just see her hair. And I think in this view, it's maybe a little bit hard to see in this view, but her hand is on his chest. And I think there's an aspect of, are they involved? Is he angry because he's been caught cheating? Or I don't know if I've over explained it, but I mean, I think that's I think that's so to me it has a beginning, middle, and end.
To me, it's ambiguity, but I don't see a beginning, a middle, and an end in it at all. So I don't quite get it.
I think for me, and if someone wants to say, "Hey, William, I think you've over explained this," I think for me, the beginning, middle, and end is the photo is the middle, or you could say that the photo is the middle. And I'm going to explain it maybe a little bit differently. If I were, and the first image that comes to my mind, if I were in Washington and I took a picture of the Washington Monument, I think anyone would look at that picture and go, "Oh, that's a picture of the Washington Monument." And I think what I'm trying to do when I'm photographing very often is to try, especially when I'm photographing people, I guess, is to try to sort of bring maybe the word you use, maybe ambiguity is it. Because the viewer, I think, has to interpret, what actually is this a photo of? And I would like to think, in the example that we just put on the screen, that I would like to think it's open to interpretation of what that's a photo of.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's what I mean by beginning, middle, and end. That you have to sort of make it up.
Yeah, it's very different than the Washington statue, because it's a statue and there's no motion in it. So I'm still going to go with ambiguity.
Okay, maybe it's ambiguity. Maybe ambiguity is it. But ambiguity, maybe that's a good I was going to say substitute, or I mean, because the great thing about an ambiguous photograph is, and maybe that's the same, maybe that's the same thing, is as a viewer, I have to look at that photo and go, what's going on here? How did these people get in this situation? What's going to happen after the photo was taken? I think that's what I mean by that.
Maybe I should change it to tell a story with your photo.
Sure, whatever's easiest for everyone.
Does everybody feel like that would be easier to accomplish?
Stephanie, I just have a comment.
Go
and
for
a
it.
question. I have a couple of photos that I have that I think are ambiguous. Like I really like them because of that. I think that, you know, I want people to engage and go, what's going on here? You know, what's the story here? And I have shared them with other people, and I find that they tell me that they don't like the photo because it's not clear what's going on. I always get this kind of reaction like, oh, it's too ambiguous, you know. No, you can't figure out what's going on, and so it's not. I get a lot of negative reactions.
Interesting.
And so it's just very interesting because I like those photos, and so anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because Stephanie, I think that it can make for a really interesting conversation about, you know, what should the challenge be? What can you say? What's the aim? Do photos that make people uncomfortable work? When do they work? You know, and I think it's a really interesting.
So we're getting into a big area. Actually, somebody else wanted to talk. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think I understand the challenge completely, and I like that photograph. And there's something that I know a lot about film and fiction writing. And when you write a scene, it's good to start it in the middle. And the way I see that photograph is that something has happened before and something is going to happen after, and it's dynamic because of that.
And so to Bonnie's point, I think it was Bonnie, whoever, I think you've raised a big question, right? Do photographs always need to be liked? And I would say that you try to approach photography and a photograph with a goal, actually. And maybe the goal is not necessarily that it be liked. And I think I think everybody's going to know what I'm going to say. I think it's okay to have a photo that not everybody is going to like, and maybe that's better.
Yep.
Sierra, you want to say something, or you have a question?
Well, I think we're starting to get into psychoanalysts to a degree, and also our friends. It's kind of like we all have different personalities and different kinds of friends, and an image that one person shows their friends is going to get one reaction, and you could show that same image to a different group of friends, and you're going to get an entirely different reaction. And then that also just goes to what is art. I mean,
Sure.
Art can be a slap in the face, or art can be a gentle caress. And in terms of images and people liking things, there's lots of images that have done a lot in the world for good or bad that people have loved or hated. I mean, think of image from the Vietnam War of the naked young woman girl running that had just been sprayed with napalm or whatever. People hated that photograph, but what change did it affect? How did it wake people up? So whether we like things or not, or whether we question things, you know, I mean, what's art?
And you know what I would say about that image that you just referenced is I remember seeing that image for the first time, right? As a kid, it might have been in that book that I talked. I know you weren't at the beginning of the presentation, Sierra, but but it's a similar type of image for me. uh, because and you just explained what happened in that image, but I remember seeing that image for the first time, and I think, I think I even remember asking my parents, "What is this? What am I looking at?" And they had to explain it to me, because it's such a powerful image. I think in part because it's not clear what's going on, but you see this girl, she's naked, she's obviously terrified, running from something, and it's a very disturbing image.
I don't remember where I saw it, but a short while back, I read a quote from another photographer that says, "I want my images to create more questions than answers." And I think that's kind of fascinating because, I mean, ultimately, why are you photographing? Are you photographing for yourself to get some kind of message across? Are you photographing for approval of others? Are you photographing for a story or publication? And none of those are wrong. And it doesn't
Right.
really matter why you're photographing,
Right.
as long as you end up with something that inspires you and conveys your perspective. So, I like questions. I like open, I call it an open-ended photograph because you don't really know what it is. And that's appropriate for some things, but not for others. So it depends.
Right.
It comes back to why you're shooting and what you're trying to communicate, in my opinion.
Right.
So,
And I would agree with that. There's all kinds of reasons to photograph, and sometimes it's just identification. Here's a photograph of the Washington Monument. But I think very often, at least for me, the most intriguing photographs are ones that were taken, and they're not necessarily trying to identify something, and they maybe are raising a question, like you just said. And for me, whether we call it ambiguity or a story, I think there's something very powerful in an image that you have to look at, and think about, and maybe bring part of yourself to it as a viewer, and you're going to bring your interpretation, to what that is. And maybe that's what I meant before, where I was sort of unsuccessfully comparing photography to video, but I think part of what I was trying to get at, and I'm going to make another unsuccessful comparison, but this time it goes a little bit like, I mean, I'm one of those people who's watched The Godfather, 100 times, and every time I watch it, I can get something different out of it. But I usually, if I'm talking to someone about The Godfather, we usually have, about the same opinion about the movie, and that's because the director um, shot it in a very specific way, wanted to get across certain things, and I think the beauty of photography is that very often the photographer will deliberately leave, as you were saying, Tim, the photographer will leave it sort of vague and give the viewer an opportunity to sort of meet the photographer halfway and sort of say, this is what I think it's about. And I'm not saying that I'm always successful at that, but that's something that I think about.
I don't know how to raise my hand. I'm
Oh, sorry.
sorry. It's storytelling, I think is what you explained.
Yeah.
We don't, it should be a strong enough photograph to give some intrigue to it, to really bring you into it. And it's an important photo, but you keep looking at it, engage with it, and get something out of it. I think that's what your photographs do. So
Thank you.
great presentation.
The uh Only because I deliberately only used that one photograph so I wouldn't have to reference multiple ones, but just going back to that, the soldier and the padre photograph, I'm not kidding when I tell people, like, I think about that photograph, at least once a week, probably maybe more, I don't know, maybe once a day, um because as a child it made such a profound impact on me, and it became sort of the model for photography for me. And you know, I don't, I think it was only uh, you know, it took me a long time to sort of figure out like, oh, the signs in the background say butcher shop, or at least in Spanish they do. And I was like, oh wow. So there were sort of even deeper levels within the photograph. And to your point, um, I think, I think most people, maybe that's an overreach, but I'm going to go with it. I think, I think you could take that photograph, not know anything about it, show it to someone, and they're going to have a reaction in their own head. I think they're going to create what the story is, because I think you're kind of forced to. You look at this photograph and you see a soldier that's either injured or dying, you don't know. You see um, a priest who obviously looks, he looks like he's concerned, or I mean, at least the way the photographer told the story, he's in the middle of gunfire as this photo is taking place. And I think you can't look at that photo without trying to, as a human being, trying to interpret what you're looking at. And that's, I think, where the story is created.
Did you ever research that image of what was happening?
You know, not much more than what I read about it. I know that the photographer, whose name I always goof up, was a photographer for a newspaper in the Venezuelan civil war in 1962. At least the way I sort of remember the story originally, he doesn't even remember taking the photograph, because, you know, here's a guy, he's trying not to get shot himself, and I think somehow he must have seen this scene, sort of popped his camera out, probably almost unconsciously, like, I've got to get this shot. And then, you know, sort of like, you know, then got cover wherever he was trying to stay out of the way of the bullets. You know, in the quote that I read, he said, you know, he was for 45 minutes, he was just, you know, hunkered, you know, pressed down, I think, against, I don't know, the pavement or something, trying not to get shot. And he happened to snap this photo in the course of doing that.
I just found the story behind the photograph of priest holding a wounded soldier in the 1962 Venezuelan insurrection. Should I put it in the chat?
Sure, sure.
I want to read it.
Yeah, I looked up the picture too. It's a butcher shop behind the soldier and the priest.
And I didn't realize that was a butcher shop for decades. And I think something made me look it up, I don't know, within the last couple of years. And when I found out that that was a butcher shop, and at least my Spanish isn't great, but I'm told that the word for butcher shop is also the same as the word for carnage. So so if you're a Spanish speaker and you're looking at that photo, you're seeing in the background there's a you know, the word butcher shop, and here they are. Yeah, so they're being, so there's a, so literally and figuratively, this is a photograph of a soldier being butchered, and the priest, you know, coming to his aid.
But he was giving he was, let's see, he was walking around and giving last rites to dying soldiers. And they gave other perspectives of that same shot. That's kind of
That's a brave priest.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm going to read that. It looks interesting. Well, I think everybody has asked questions, and
I'm looking at Erica G's photograph, and I'm seeing many more stories in that picture than in everybody else's photo. It's Erica's back. I was seeing on my screen a picture of a golden retriever.
Okay.
Now that she's back, it's just like the rest of us, no story. I mean, lots of stories, but it's a different story. I was looking at the dog and just thinking, oh,
Cute story.
William, I just wanted to say it's really nice to catch up again. I haven't seen him. William and I knew each other 20 years ago in a different lifetime, and we've both kind of ended up following similar paths, but I really enjoyed following your work. And one of the things that I really like seeing is there always seems to be a dimension to it. It's like there's a foreground, a midground, and a background. And if you actually spend the time looking at it, I think there is a full story there. And I think a lot of photographers miss that. I think that's what so many of the historic photographers did so well, is having multiple elements, but not so divided that you can't focus on one thing. And it's just, there's a talent to seeing that. And I think you do that really, really well. So
thank you so much, Tim.
Yeah.
Since you brought it up, and since we're in a photography group here, I'll just mention that I usually in my photographs, I didn't really talk about this, but I usually like to include layers. And so for me, in addition to being sort of a beginning, middle, and an end, even though it's a photograph, a still photograph, I usually am thinking about sort of a foreground, a subject, and a background. And so at least when I'm photographing, I'm usually sort of, maybe I'll explain it a little bit differently. I'm going to go on a tangent. I think, because I'm known as a music photographer, another complaint, I talked about red lights. Another complaint that music photographers frequently have is, oh gosh, the microphone stand was in the way, or I couldn't photograph the guitarist because this was in the way, because there's a lot of gear on stage. And I determined a long time ago that not only was I going to embrace all that gear on the stage, I was going to make that, part of the photograph. So I think where my music photographs are maybe different from others is that you will see, and hopefully it's not overly noticeable, but part of the composition for me is, oh, there's a microphone stand here, and there's a I don't know, a set list somewhere, or there's something, there's a light dangling somewhere. And when I'm photographing, I'm seeing all of that. And I'm choosing, Stephanie said something to me before the presentation about not cropping. And that's true. I don't crop that much. Like, maybe I'll decide, oh, I want this to be 8x10. But for the most part, everything that I'm shooting, like, I intend that to be in the photograph. And all of the different stuff. And somewhere in the middle of all that, there's a musician. Or even at the Paper Mill Creek Saloon, if you look at those photographs, very often there's taps in the foreground, the beer taps things, or there's glasses there, and I'm typically not trying to, like, occasionally I'll photograph someone there and they're like, oh, let me move this out of the way. And I'm like, no, that's all part of it. So I try as much as possible. I don't know if it's a little bit like street photography, but I'm trying to capture everything that's there, and I'm not trying to sort of like make it look better than it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but to build on that, William, I think there's an art to that, because there's a difference between a cluttered photograph that has everything in it and also directing your viewer to see what you want them to see. And I think that's something that you learn through practice. And I think that's something that I learned from looking at your photographs, because I really like to direct me to look at specific things and take me through this journey through your images.
It's like you use that clutter to frame your subject.
Only because, gosh, I don't want this meeting I don't want to be the guy that everyone goes, oh, William kept us on the line until 9 o'clock. But one of the things that, gosh, see, you can't fit everything into the presentation. But
The
one
paper
of the
mill's
things
closed tonight, so we got nothing else to do. You got
that's
all
true.
night.
That is true. Yeah. So let's just stay on the line all night. One of the things that I also think about, and this is I've noticed this more. This is more of a recent thing that I could have baked into my lessons, and this comes out more in the nothing against pretty flowers. But in those photographs, I'm usually creating a path for the viewer. And so I'm imagining that their eye is starting here, and I kind of imagine it going out the other side. And I usually sort of try to find something in the foreground that's kind of a focal point. And then I usually sort of have sort of a path, and I try to have a little bit of sky somewhere, even if it's just a little tiny piece. And my sort of thought is that because I said in my introduction to those photographs that I want them to be, or at least I want to show something that may appear menacing. And I thought, well, my solution I don't want people to be stuck in this menacing photograph. So I'm going to give them a path to get out of the photograph. And that's why I sort of leave that, that sort of sky, usually, I can't always get that, but a sky or a light patch that the person can find their way out of that sort of menacing photograph if they want to.
It's an old art director trick.
Yeah.
Your eye always goes to the brightest spot.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Cool tool. Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. I super appreciate one, again, having the opportunity to make the presentation. Again, I said this at the beginning, but I'll say it at the end. For me, it's just been a great experience having an opportunity to revisit a lot of these photographs. It helped me learn myself about about those photographs, and it helped me kind of contextualize them and put that list together of sort of the learnings, things that have been rattling around in my head for years, but I've never actually written them down. Thank you for staying and listening, and thank you for the great questions. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, I'm always up for talking about photography. So if anybody ever wants to reach out to me and say, gosh, William, I'd love to talk photography with you, I'm always up for that.
Yeah, there's a photographer that works for Magnum. I can't think of his name right now, but I saw a show of his, and he's photographed on the Mexican border of the cartels. And I think you'd really it'd be impactful for you to see his work.
I would love if you share it with me. I would love to see.
Yeah, I will. It's right up your alley. So thanks for the presentation too. It was great. Appreciate it.
Why don't you post it on the Facebook page and tag William, because I'd like to see it. I think
yeah. I have to. It's been years, but I'll have to dig him up. Hoagland. His last name is Hoagland. Hoagland. And I've forgotten his first name, but he's a very famous. I think he was with Magnum, but he's in Iraq at the beginning of the war in Iraq and done some amazing stuff. But
I'm going to try to look him up. Thank you so much.
Please do. Please do.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Donald. I thought you were done.
No, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I knew you would be amazing. Thank you, William.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And then don't forget, we have Dan Bombach. I'm probably saying it. Am I saying his name right, Mallory? You're muted.
And Brownback. We did a group show at the gallery that was Lake's Gallery together. And he did color and I did black and white. We just called it black and white and color.
That was a great little gallery too.
Yeah, I miss it.
Elsewhere gallery. All right, everybody. I'm gonna post our recording tomorrow. So,
But I just want to say Dan is way out there in the realm of photography.
that's good. We like that.
Yeah, I think you'll like his stuff.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
So much, William.